Hello, everyone. Welcome to the fourth meeting of the Standing Committee on Industry of the House of Commons. Pursuant to Standing Order 108-2 and the motion adopted by the committee is meeting to continue its discussion of critical minerals. We will be having a hybrid meeting according to order adopted on November 25th, 2021. Members can participate in person or using Zoom. And I think you're all very familiar with the health guidelines. So for those who are here in person, please continue to follow the health guidelines. And I would like to thank the minister for being here, the Honorable Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry, François-Philippe Champagne. We have Terry Henderson. We also have from the Department of Industry, Simon Kennedy, Deputy Minister, Catherine Burke, who is Director General at the Investment Review Branch. We have from Department of Natural Resources, Jeff Labonté, Assistant to Deputy Minister, Lands and Minerals Sector. And from the Department of Public Safety, Dominique Rochon, Senior Assistant Deputy Minister, National Security and Cybersecurity Branch. And so without further ado, we will ask for Minister Champagne to now give his opening remarks. He does have to leave the meeting at 6:30. And officials will be there throughout the meeting until 7:30 to answer members' questions. Please go ahead, Minister. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you for welcoming me to the committee today. I would like to wish everyone happy 2022. Mr. Chair, dear colleagues, thank you for giving me the opportunity to discuss Canada's approach regarding foreign investment reviews, specifically when it comes to critical minerals.
With all Canadians watching tonight, under the Investment Canada Act, or as we call the ICA, all foreign investments are subject to a thorough review. This process is agnostic of country or industry and applies regardless of the value of the investment. It is a multi-step process led by my department and Canada's national security and intelligence agencies. Investments in critical minerals receive enhanced scrutiny. As you will recall, in March of 2021, I was the one who updated the publicly available national security guidelines to make it clear to the world that we will apply this enhanced scrutiny where critical minerals are implicated. As a former Minister of Infrastructure, International Trade, as well as Foreign Affairs, I have been thinking about these issues from a number of angles and for many, many years. That is the perspective I now bring as Minister of Industry of Canada. Transactions involving critical minerals are systematically and thoroughly reviewed and scrutinized. Neolithium was no exception. Let me be very clear. Neolithium was reviewed by the government and national security experts, full stop. Soyons clairs, on ne fera aucun.
Let me be clear. We will not compromise on matters of national security. That is our absolute priority. The National Security Review Framework integrated into the Act is a crucial tool which will enable us to protect Canada from these threats.
I understand that not everyone is familiar with how the ICA works. So let me provide some details on the process. From day one, security and intelligence agencies assess information and intelligence related to the Canadian asset being acquired or business being established, the terms of the investment, and the foreign investor. This often includes consultation with Canada's allies. Following these consultations, investments that could be injurious to national security are referred to the Governor in Council, who may order a further extended review under Section 25(3) of the Act. If the transaction does not meet the legal threshold to extend the review further, meaning it is found to not be injurious to Canada's national security, then the process ends. People mistake the extended review as being the only one where national security concerns are taken into consideration. Let me be clear that a Section 25.3 order is not required for the security and intelligence agencies and other investigative bodies to review an investment. The legal authorities under the Act to investigate are exactly the same from the moment we become aware of a proposed investment through each period of the multi-step review process. It is this review process that was followed in the case of Neolithium. Those who claim that a national security review was not done in this case are simply, knowingly or unknowingly, misrepresenting the facts. Instead, they are cherry-picking and jumping ahead to another step in the process, further down the chain of verifications under the ICA. There was sufficient information to make a determination at that stage of the review that no national security harm could arise as a result of this transaction. Permettez-moi de le répéter en français. La transaction.
I will repeat that in French. The Neolithium transaction was closely reviewed by experts. No harm or risk to Canada's national security was identified that could have justified an extension of the review.
Noted that by law, there are stringent confidentiality requirements to protect both the commercially sensitive information shared by companies during a review, as well as classified information relating to Canada's national security. It is public knowledge and worth repeating here that although Neolithium is domiciled and incorporated in Canada, the mine is in Argentina, the operations of the company are in Argentina, and all but a handful of its employees are based in Argentina. Finally, we are going to be talking a lot about critical minerals in the years ahead. At least, I hope so. So let's clarify certain things. One could be misled into thinking that all critical minerals are inherently the same and of equal value. The reality is critical minerals come in many forms with varying degrees of importance to Canada's supply chain. Each deserves its own consideration and action. On comprend l'importance des minéraux critiques.
We understand the importance of critical minerals, and that is why, Mr. Chair, our government announced in Budget 21 funding to improve Canada's critical mineral supply. Minister Wilkinson and I are currently working on a Canadian strategy on critical minerals, in addition to our investment of $8 billion in the Net Zero Accelerator, in order to attract major investment in the entire supply chain of electric vehicle batteries.
Lithium and battery production, for example, there is lithium carbonate and lithium hydroxide. Electric battery production in North America does not require or rely on imports of lithium carbonate. Even a cursory look at the market shows that lithium hydroxide is the preferred product for electric vehicle battery production by automakers, manufacturers, cathode suppliers, and consumers in North America, Europe, and Japan. Factors such as the nature and strategic value to Canada of the mineral deposits involved, the ability of Canadian supply chains to exploit the asset, Canada's projected ability to produce a commodity itself, global commodity prices, current geopolitical circumstances, and the nature of the Canadian business are all taken into consideration when determining what constitutes a national security concern. There are some of the important factors the government considers when deciding whether an investment is a potential risk to Canada's national security. And I would say, Mr. Chair, it is irresponsible to brush them aside for a good headline. Canadians deserve a sober, thoughtful, and factual conversation on this matter. Our record as a government makes it abundantly clear that where national security is concerned, we do not hesitate to take decisive action, and our assessment of risk keeps pace with evolving economic and geopolitical circumstances. Je vous remercie. Merci.
Thank you, Minister. Before we start, witnesses, try to keep your answers as proportionate to the questions as possible. And colleagues, I've stolen a trick from the previous chair, the former chair of this committee. So yellow means 30 seconds and red means time's up. So we'll start for 6 minutes with Mr. Fast. The floor is yours.
Well, Minister, thank you for appearing before our committee, and I want to assure you that we are doing our job. Sober thought brought to a very serious issue, which is Canada's national security and our security of supply chains for what is a burgeoning a lithium battery industry in the world. Now, Minister, you're aware of the revised Investment Canada guidelines which you released, which call for enhanced scrutiny of transactions involving state-owned enterprises, yes?
Indeed, because I'm the one who, as you said, Mr. Fast, instructed the department to publish them.
And you're aware of the updated ICA guidelines that were released about a year later calling for enhanced scrutiny of deals involving critical minerals, yes?
Indeed, because I'm the one who issued the guidelines.
And critical minerals include lithium, correct?
Indeed.
And you're familiar with the Canada-U.S. Joint Action Plan on Critical Minerals Collaboration, and I emphasize collaboration, which was established to improve information sharing when it comes to critical minerals and rare earths? Yes? You're familiar with the Canada-U.S. Joint Action Plan on Critical Minerals that was signed in 2020?
Yes, I am.
All right. And that plan calls for much greater collaboration between Canada and the United States when it comes to the security of our critical mineral supply chains, correct?
Indeed.
So let me ask you, when exactly were you made aware of a proposal for Zijin Mining Group, a state-owned enterprise out of China, to purchase the Canadian critical minerals company Leo Lithium?
So let me be clear with you, Mr. Fast, and all the Canadians which are watching. There was absolutely a national security review when it comes to the lithium transaction. That transaction was reviewed by all the relevant departments within the Government of Canada.
Actually, that wasn't my question.
National security agencies.
Minister, with respect.
Intelligence agency. And let me just finish.
My question was when?
And it was subject to enhanced scrutiny by our own guidelines, which I published in March of last year.
Minister, that wasn't my question. I asked, when exactly were you made aware of this transaction?
The power to investigate starts from the moment that we're over a transaction. And I can assure you and all Canadians that in all circumstances, not only we review the transaction for national security, but that, as you said, Mr.
So
Fast, you're a very experienced minister at the time, that this transaction was subject to enhanced scrutiny under the guidelines that you just referred to.
So I'm going to ask a third time, when did you find out about this transaction? Date.
Mr. Fast, as I said to you as an experienced minister, that transaction was subject, and as you know, I'm trying to be as fair and transparent with you as I can.
You're not answering the question.
I'm trying to be as transparent as I can be with you and Canadians.
So let me try.
I can tell you.
Let me try a different question. If you won't answer that one, let me ask.
Gentlemen, if I may intervene, just let the minister finish answering, and then Mr. Fast, you can ask. So I'll give the floor to Mr. Fast for your question.
Well, thank you, and Mr. Chair, I hope this isn't clawing away at my time, because what we can't afford to have is the minister not answer questions but waste the time of the committee. I am here with a serious effort to get to the bottom of this transaction. So I'm going to move on to my next question because the minister failed to answer that one. Minister, did you receive a briefing from your officials on the transaction?
As I said, Mr. Fast, you're very aware, There are a number of confidentiality requirements under the Act, which I'm not at liberty to expand. But what I can say to you and all Canadians, that this transaction, because it involves critical mineral, was reviewed for national security and was subject to an enhanced scrutiny under the guidelines that I published last March.
Did you receive a briefing from officials?
As I said again, you're familiar because you're very experienced as a minister. I'm not at liberty
Just yes
to
or
go
no.
into the details.
Yes or no?
What I'm
Yes
saying
or
to
no?
you is that the transaction was subject to national security.
Okay, I'll move on. Did you apply the enhanced scrutiny that your guidelines call for?
Absolutely, Mr. Fast, because there's no two national security process. There is only one national security process, which is a multi-step process that involves from day one national security. And I would refer you to the Act, that under the Act as minister, the power to investigate, to compel the submission of document and answering questions start from day one.
Minister,
So
you brought in...
I'm not understanding what you're trying to get at, because
No,
what I'm
no,
saying is that national security is a multi-step process that starts
Minister,
from day one.
My question is, did you apply the enhanced security review that you yourself introduced with a new set of guidelines?
Indeed,
yes or
we
no?
did. Yes, we did.
How did you do that? How was that the case when
Again,
you didn't even exercise the additional 45 days that the Act allows for?
With respect, you're misleading Canadian when you're saying that, because there's not two national security review process. There's only one.
It's a multi-stage review process,
It's a
which you
multi-step process,
suggested.
but starts on day one. The power to compel. Once the moment we become aware of information about a transaction, we have the power to investigate. And that's exactly
Minister,
what we did in this circumstance.
okay, did you personally consult with Canada's Public Safety Minister on this transaction?
There is a very well established process between me and the Public Safety Minister of Canada.
So did you?
Thank you, Mr. Fast.
That's the question, yes or no?
I'm saying there's a very well established process.
That's
between our
not an
two
answer.
partners
You know
when it
that.
comes to
Mr. Fast,
national
Mr.
security.
Fast, that's all the time we have for this round, but we'll come back to Conservatives. And now we'll move to Mr. Dong and Erskine Smith for 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair, and very good to see you, Minister Champagne.
It's good to see you again as well, and all the members of the committee.
Welcome to the committee. In your earlier statement, you said in March 2021, you announced the updated guideline on national security review of investments issued under the Investment Canada Act. Can you explain the timing and the rationale behind that decision and how that decision strengthened Canadians' interest in critical mineral?
Yeah, well, thank you very much for the question, because that's very important. On one end, I would say, Mr. Dong, we want to welcome foreign investment in Canada. But on the other end, we want to protect our national security. So what I issued in March of last year was to make sure that investors from around the world would be well aware that we would apply and then national security when it comes to a number of things. Companies in Canada involving personal data, sensitive technology, and critical minerals, to the question of our colleague, Mr. Fast, before. Obviously, this was very much needed. As I told you, as a former trade minister and foreign affairs minister, very well aware of the geopolitical circumstances that we're living through. Consulting with allies, I've been talking to colleagues in Europe and in the United States to make sure that we would have a system of trusted partner when it comes to the resiliency of our supply chain. And I think that telling the world that, yes, Canada is open for business, but at the same time, that we would apply national security, enhanced national security when it comes to certain areas like critical minerals was a great signal and a much needed signal to make sure that people would know exactly what we would do if they intend to invest in Canada.
So in short, the decision to update the guideline does strengthen Canadian interest in critical mineral.
Well, we want to protect our national security. And as you may have seen, not only I introduced the new guidelines, but in July of last year, I also introduced a new framework for research security in Canada. And as you would recall, I did not hesitate to block transaction. You may recall the TMAC mine in Nunavut, where we blocked the foreign acquisition. And more recently, to the Governor of Council, I've ordered that China Mobile divest of its assets in Canada. So on one end, we are open to business. That's what I was trying to say to our colleague, Mr. Faz, before, is that there's only one national security review process. It's a multi-step process that starts from day one, involves all the relevant departments, the national security agencies, the intelligence agencies of Canada, and we make a determination to make sure that on one end, we welcome investment in Canada, but one thing is sure, we will never, never compromise national security.
That's good. Are all foreign transactions reviewed?
Well, we review all foreign transactions for national security. Like I said, this was very much the case when it comes to Neo-Lithium. This was absolutely reviewed. And like I said, anyone who suggests otherwise is not grounded in facts. This was reviewed from the moment we were made aware of the transaction. We applied not only the review, but we applied enhanced scrutiny under the new guidelines.
Thank you. Chair, I'll give the rest of my time to MP Erskine Smith.
Thanks to my colleague, Mr. Dong. Minister,
good to see you.
Good to see you too. My question relates to state-controlled and owned enterprises, because our committee in the last session recommended that where you do have acquisitions that involve state-controlled or state-owned enterprises, that you would implement a fuller national review. I understand there is a preliminary basis. There is a look at acquisitions regardless, but the Act does provide for a fulsome national security review. And walk me through if that did take place, and if it didn't take place, why it didn't take place, given the acquiring company in this instance.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. That's a very good question. And you may have seen in the new guidelines that we published in Section 7, the government will subject all foreign investment by state-owned investor or private investor assessed as being closely tied or subject to the direction of a foreign government to enhance scrutiny. And that's the point I was trying to make. And I'm happy you asked the question to the colleague before, because any suggestion, and there was suggestion before by members to say, was that subject to enhanced scrutiny? The answer is yes, absolutely, because that's exactly what the guidelines call for. But the suggestion that the national security process, like I tried to explain under the Act, is a multi-step process, but the national security review starts from day one.
Can I ask, Minister, in relation to the witnesses we heard yesterday, emphasizes, I think, a useful point, which is if Canada decides on every single transaction on a case-by-case basis, then we miss the forest for the trees. That if you want to have a broader strategy around critical minerals, you can't simply do it piecemeal, case by case, and you have to take a step back and look at the broader strategy. So walk me through how this particular transaction plays into a broader strategy, and do we do it on a case-by-case basis, or are we taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture?
Well, obviously, transaction are reviewed on a case-by-case basis, but totally to your point, we're taking the big picture, because that's why the guidelines were for. I would say, I know you're very, you have a lot of experience when it comes to technology. That's why at that time, in March of last year, I wanted to tell the world that if they intend to invest in Canada, if they invest in critical minerals, in strategic technologies, or any companies involving personal data of Canadians, they would be subject to enhanced scrutiny. And that's exactly what I was trying to explain to the member before, is that this transaction and any transaction involving state-owned enterprises under the new guidelines that I put in place will be subject to additional and what we call enhanced scrutiny under the Act.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre. C'est tout le temps qu'on a. Je passerai maintenant.
Thank you. That's all the time we have. And now I will give the floor to Mr. Sébastien Lemire for 6 minutes. Hello, Minister. Nice to see you. Now, at yesterday's meeting, we heard from a witness who answered a question by saying that, for example, with Chinese acquisitions, it's very hard to say whether it's a business or geostrategic acquisition. And that is why that, in his opinion, we need to do more and more national security reviews, or even do them systematically. What do you think, especially given that your latest mandate letter asked for the Canada Investment Act to be modernized in order to look at the possible risks having to do with foreign investments? Thank you for asking that question, Mr. Lemire. That's what I tried to do last March with the new directives. when it comes to the types of investments that affect critical minerals, they will be subject to an even more enhanced review, which is what we did with neolithium and what we will continue to do. Because we not only need to review each transaction, but also look at the entire situation. For example, when it comes to the TMAC mine in Nunavut, we did not hesitate to block the transaction where a foreign buyer wanted to acquire the mine. We blocked it. We also blocked it with China Mobile, where I asked them to divest of their assets in Canada. So in that sense, we consult with our partners. We have a system that's working well. And when it comes to supply chains, when we're looking for reliable partners in Europe and the States, and even as we've spoken about before, in Quebec, we're creating a battery ecosystem. Lithium, manganese, graphite, nickel, cobalt. That's all things that we're looking at very closely. Coming back again to the last meeting of the committee, Mr. Wark said that only 1% of Canadian business assets acquired by foreign businesses are subject to a national security review. That seems like very little. That seems like very little. Do you believe in this process under the current rules? Do you not feel that these reviews should be broader in scope? And given the specificities identified by the government of Quebec on batteries, wouldn't that be an issue? Answer. Well, let me briefly say that I think there's a misunderstanding of how the Canada Investment Act works. The minister's power to inquire begins the day that we are notified of the transaction, either through a direct notification or through publicly. The national security inquiry begins the very first day. And then it's at another stage later on in the process. But what I've been trying to say to you and to Canadians is that the national security review starts the first day, day one, and continues throughout. And there are reasonable grounds. When there are reasonable grounds to think that there could be an injury to national security, that's when we proceed further into the process. And that's where, and I will be pleased to talk about this with committee members, I think there is a lack of understanding of this process. The analysis commences on day one, not after 45 days. And in fact, when we hear about the transaction through a public channel, we start the review right away. So there's also an issue of transparency. Do you agree or not that the government should be more transparent and be able to explain publicly the factors that it depended on in order to decide whether or not to proceed to a national security review? Well, I try to be as open and transparent as possible, but you will understand that we need to balance national security factors with confidentiality concerns. Confidential information from companies. And we know that the Investment Canada Act has a very clear confidentiality framework. But if you wish, and the chair of the committee agrees, I could ask the officials to send you in the next few days the latest annual report, which will give you further information on the transactions reviewed last year during the last period. And we ensured that we explained the process properly to ensure that the national security analysis, it's important to explain that the analysis begins on day one. And if sending those documents enables the committees to be better informed, I would be pleased to ask the officials to send the information. Thank you very much. We did a committee study on the Investment Canada Act. I imagine you have read our report, and I would like to ask what recommendations from our report, which was tabled in the spring, what have you applied? For example, recommendation 4 for the Government of Canada to protect strategic sectors such as agri-food, manufacturing, health, intellectual property, data expertise, and a number of other areas. And that's a bit what we're talking about today. Well, with the new standards that I brought in March, it was exactly what the committee had recommended. And if there are sectors that you feel are not sufficiently protected, the idea is to attract foreign investment in order to help support our companies while also protecting national security, while also keeping a global perspective in order to protect our supply chains. But I would like to thank the committee for its recommendations, which we take very seriously. Thank you very much. Mr. Massé, please.
Mr. Minister, to our committee. Good to see you as well, too. With regards to your opening comments, you mentioned the Act is agnostic to where the investment's coming from. So I want to make sure I'm clear on this. And so you're saying then if an investment from Russia, it wouldn't matter, but we might go to some conflict with them, with Ukraine, whether or not our current situation with China is not influenced whatsoever, so that there's no political or connection. I mean, we have Syrian, we have all kinds of different countries out there with different records. In this government, as well as ourselves, pushed finally for the new deal with the United States to get labor and environment in the agreement. So are you saying that there is no connection whatsoever to a country and where the investment comes from in the moral, ethical issues that that nation's doing?
Well, I would say, Mr. Massé, you're a very experienced member of parliament. We look at a number of factors. In the case of Neo Lithium, we look at the mineral, the location, where's the operation, the impact on supply chain. But as a former trade minister and international and foreign affairs minister, you might expect that not only we look at the national security under the Act, but for those that we have listed, you may recall in March, I even expanded to make sure that the world would know that if they intend to invest in Canada, we welcome, but we would apply enhanced scrutiny like we did with respect to critical minerals. So very well aware of the geopolitical circumstances, consulting with our allies. You may have seen me when it comes to supply chain. I've been talking to colleagues in Europe and the White House to say we should have trusted partners in terms of our supply chain.
And I appreciate that, but I guess here's where this one strikes a little bit of a pattern that there's not much of a change when we know Parliament had already spoken about the genocide of Uyghurs, and here we are, we're back with something that we could even put something on pause from a state-owned Chinese company, and we still don't have a decision on Huawei. Why wouldn't this government start to put a stronger lens on the human rights and the other kind of, I guess, where there is some support even across political lines on issues, from stopping state-owned companies from interfering on Canadian companies or buying them up?
Well, Mr. Massé, you would know that when we do an Invest in Canada process, it's a quasi-judicial process. And in the case of Neo Lithium, I just want to reassure you and all Canadians, we did a review to ensure that there was no national security risk. And that is the conclusion that was reached with the different departments involved in our national security intelligence agencies. But to your question, you can rest assured that I look at these things very seriously. We will never compromise Canada's national security. And I'm very well aware of the geopolitical circumstances. You will recall what I did in China Mobile. You will recall that I did not hesitate a moment to act on TMAC, the mine in Nunavut. And I will continue to use all the powers vested in me as minister under the Act to protect national security and our supply chain in Canada.
Well, I think, though, that maybe perhaps, and this is where I look at the broader picture on this particular issue, is that perhaps we should have a further discussion about those things. Now, back in 2015, when your government took office, it did say that it wanted more foreign investments, and it did say it would be more transparent in these types of reviews. What's different today than what was in 2015? Because we understand some of the limitations that can take place, but there was a recognition, having myself gone through everything from Noranda being taken over, Falconbridge, Inco. There's a whole series that could go on. And what's different now in terms of specifically publicly available for your decision-making process?
Well, the very fact that we're here today, like I said, I'm trying to be as open, transparent, and candid with you. I think that tonight, because we have a number of public information, so I'm able to discuss the case. As you know, it's been pretty rare since the ICA is in place in Canada that there's been a focus on one particular transaction. What I've offered to the members of the committee is to task the department to instruct them to release to you the annual report so that you can look at it, that we can release in the next few days. You'll see that we have we provide as much information as we can under the Act. But I'm sure you understand, because you've been in Parliament for a long time. On one end, we receive confidential information from the companies. On the other end, we need to protect national security. But I'm happy to answer any questions or to be as candid as I can under the Act.
I guess this is where the larger struggle is, because I don't see the change. I mean, I don't see the change from what was promised politically. Just moving to these specific minerals, was there an evaluation done at all with regards to, even if they're not used in electric vehicles? I know I focused on that, or what other types of markets for these were done as part of the evaluation? We've heard from some of the auto sector saying that they're not as important. Others have contested that, but what other types of products were looked at for this review?
Well, I can say when you look at lithium carbonate, I mean, this is probably a resource for the Asian market. You would have seen that this is really for glaze, for sealers. This is, we're about to build a big, I would say, an ecosystem, a battery ecosystem here in Canada, and what is preferred by the manufacturer, whether it's the OEM, whether it's the battery manufacturer, whether it's the cathode active material manufacturer, is lithium hydroxide. There's many reasons for that in terms it's more sustainable, long-lasting, less recharge. So what I can say is that carbonate is more for the Asian market. Hydroxide is really what is needed and wanted in North America, Japan, and Europe. And that was one of the consideration as part. And I think that's what you've heard from other experts yesterday.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre. Merci, Monsieur Massé. On passe maintenant pour 5 minutes à...
Thank you, Mr. Mass. Now we'll move on to Mr. Crum for 5 minutes.
Welcome to the committee, Champagne.
Thank you, sir. I don't see you, but... I see you now.
I'm in the committee room, Mr. Minister.
Good to see you. Sorry, sir. I was looking at the screen.
Quite all right. I'll start with an easy question. The United States is Canada's closest neighbor and ally. Would you agree?
Indeed. I even, you may have seen that I've even agreed with the Secretary of Commerce to meet on a quarterly basis. So very well aware of that. And that's what we're pursuing with the Commerce Department to align our supply chain.
Yes, I understand you were in Washington on November 3rd to meet with the Secretary of Commerce. And in the press release that your government sent out after that meeting, it said that you and the Secretary agreed to, quote, reinforce existing cooperation under the U.S.-Canada Critical Minerals Action Plan, unquote. So, Minister, is your government still committed to the U.S.-Canada Critical Minerals Action Plan?
Very much. Absolutely.
Okay, very good. It was reported in the media on December 10th that this government would not subject the sale of neolithium to a national security review. And so I have to ask, what message does it send to our American partners and allies when you say one thing in Washington 1 month, and then you turn around and do the opposite in Ottawa the next month?
Well, I would disagree with you completely. Neolithium was subject to a full national security review in Canada. And not only it was subject to a national security review, it was subject to an enhanced security based on the guidelines that I've issued in last March. And I think that's where I'd like, if you allow me a few seconds, I just want members to really, under the Act, there is not two national security process, there's only one. And it starts from the moment that we become aware of a transaction, whether from public information or notification. And the national security review starts on day one. And it's at that time that we make our assessment. And it's a multi-step process. But to say otherwise, I would say it's not in line with the Act, because the power of the minister to investigate starts on day one. So what I will be saying to my American colleague, if asked, is we absolutely did a full national security review of neolithium.
All right. Now, Minister Champagne, in your opening statement, you said that the Investment Canada Act allows on day one for security intelligence agencies to review the transaction, including consultations with Canada's allies. And so I was wondering if you could elaborate on what consultations you did with our American allies.
Well, I wish I could go in more detail, but what I can say to you and Canadians who are watching tonight is that the process involved all the relevant departments in the government of Canada, but also our national security and intelligence agencies throughout the process. As you know, I am not at liberty under the Act to go in details of a particular transaction, but I can assure you that when we look at supply chain, and at the time where we're building a battery ecosystem in Canada, I'm very well aware of the role of lithium, of cobalt, of nickel, of magnesium, and of graphite. So therefore, you can rest assured that I understand the geopolitical implication of that, and that's why we'll never compromise on national security.
Now, Minister, in your opening statement, you indicated that not all critical minerals are the same, or not all are equally critical, if I can summarize it in that way. And
all are.
You
fair enough.
Indicate that lithium was less important than others. But in a report from the White House from June of last year, they indicate that lithium and graphite are two of the most important materials for electric vehicle batteries. So I wonder, in our consultation with the Americans, if they also indicated that lithium was not so critical element.
What I was referring to, and I'm happy that you asked the question, lithium carbonate is for the Asian market. Lithium hydroxide, which we're producing, we're about to produce in Canada, by the way. In 2-3 years, we have a company called Nemaska Lithium, which is about to produce they expect to produce 10% of the need for lithium hydroxide in the North American market. So actually, we are working very much and I'm working with Minister Will, a national strategy, and we're very much in with our American colleagues, because Canada, in my view, could be the supplier of choice, because what you see from the OEMs, the cathode active materials, and the others, what they want is proximity of supply, proximity of market, proximity of manufacturing. And that's exactly what I'm talking to our American colleagues, is how can we define supply chain? Because Canada has deposits, and we will be a producer in lithium in a not too distant future. There's a refinery being built as we speak, and will be online, as they tell me.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Minister. Time is up. On passe maintenant à Madame Lapointe pour 5 minutes.
We will now go to Madame Lapointe for 5 minutes. Thank you for being here, Minister. In my riding of Sudbury, we have a proud mining history. But even more important, our future in the mining industry is promising. Could you please tell us why Canada is well placed to be a leader when it comes to critical minerals? Answer: thank you for the question. I would say that it's because we have all the essential resources we need for batteries, for example, lithium. And as I was saying, Quebec has several mines, including a mine with the refinery which will be soon completed, Nemaska Lithium. We are also one of the main producers of Class 1 nickel, which is essential for battery production. We also have cobalt in Ontario. And as I was saying earlier, the only cobalt refinery in North America is in Ontario. So that's why in Canada we're able to be a global leader in critical minerals and in the battery industry. There's also manganese and graphite. There are mines of those as well. And so we're looking to create a strategy called From the Mine to the Recycling Center. Because what we're seeing very often is that large producers want more diversity in their supply chains, and they want more local supply chains. Canada is able to produce in a more responsible and environmental way, both when it comes to supply security, traceability. The fact that Canada is a reliable partner. With my colleagues, we are creating an ecosystem to create an entire chain here in Canada, from the mine to the recycling center. And I hope that we will be able to make some great announcements in the next few months, which will enable us to realize this vision of having Canada be one of the main battery producers in North America. Thank you, Minister. Secondly, Why do European and North American electric vehicle producers prefer Canada? The real advantage is proximity. Increasingly, we are seeing that large manufacturers want to ensure that mines and refineries are near manufacturing centers like Windsor and Detroit.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
On n'entend pas tout le temps. On manque une partie des.
We're not hearing everything. The minister's sound is cutting in and out. I don't know what it is. Maybe the bandwidth.
Je m'excuse, monsieur. Moi, je suis.
I'm sorry. I'm even plugged in with the Ethernet cable. I'm not on the Wi-Fi. I can try to repeat. Thank you, Minister. Let me check with the clerk. Is the minister's microphone in the right spot? Well, we'll start over. Mr. Généreux, thank you for letting me know. We can always try again, and you can always let me know later if there's another problem, but I think it was a temporary internet problem. Please go ahead, Minister. Yes, I'm sorry, Mr. Généreux, if it's my connection. Although, as I was saying, we're trying really hard to have a good connection. But as I was saying, it doesn't make sense to extract minerals in Africa, refine them in Asia, and to be using coal. So I think that increasingly consumers, decision makers, banks, and investors are going to want to see not only electric vehicles, but green vehicles. And I think Canada is in a great position to play a key role in that industry. Thank you. I'm very pleased to hear your answers because yesterday we heard from a couple of witnesses who underscored the importance of local. And they also said that we need to consider the whole value chain. And so I was very pleased to hear that come up in your answers. Yes, we will be working together and with our American and European partners. I am in touch with a number of companies that represent chemical processing, the mining industry, batteries, and so on. And so, indeed, that is why at the beginning I was trying to distinguish two different kinds of lithium, because it really depends on which kind. It really depends what kind of lithium it is, because here, what we have in Canada may not be what the Asian market is looking for, because they're looking more for lithium carbonate. Mr. Lemierre, please. Thank you very much. In your mandate letter, once again, Minister, you were asked to create a framework to protect clean technologies and for critical minerals. Will Canada have a pan-Canadian or pan-North American framework? Answer. Well, first of all, Mr. Lemierre, as I was saying earlier, I am closely working with the Trade Secretary, and in fact, it's the first time that Canadian and American ministers are working together on a quarterly basis. Very clearly, the semiconductor industry, the battery industry, everything that we've needed as well for the pandemic, what I'm looking to do is to work closely with our American partners to create more resilient supply chains for the next few decades. And I think that I can say that for our American colleagues, Canada is part of the solution. We have our strategy, but we need to consider that the battery or auto sectors are North American markets. And since we have a great deal going on in Quebec with lithium production, etc., we will be able to take on board the essential factors to have an industry in Canada. Question. Well, the Build Back Better situation is making us nervous as to whether the Americans really want to cooperate with us. But ultimately, we know that the real value is in the final processed product. For example, when an electric vehicle is purchased. So I would like to ask what the role is of lithium mines, such as the one in Abitibi-Témiscamingue. What can we do to ensure that these substances are processed? Inaudible for the interpreter due to the internet cutting out. It's not enough to pull products out of the earth. We need to be able to process them as well. That's a great example of the mine in Abitibi-Témiscamingue. The processing is done in Bécancour. We are creating an ecosystem where increasingly there are projects in the pipeline. I can't say everything today, but we're looking to create an entire ecosystem to do as much as possible domestically, not just to extract the mineral, but also to refine it and assemble batteries here in Canada in order to be an important partner in the battery industry. Thank you very much. Now, Mr. Mass, 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Minister, one of the things that is just getting its clock cleaned when it comes to auto investment. I mean, there has been some investment, and we heard, again, the $6 billion figure, but just the other day, General Motors announced another battery facility in Michigan and also another plant expansion that actually eclipsed the entire investment in Canada over the last number of years. I've been pushing for a national auto strategy. Do you not think it's time for a national auto strategy? Because we are losing our percentage of OEMs, and we no longer even have Canadian CEOs based in Canada. What assurances can you give outside of this particular situation, if it wasn't valuable enough for the auto sector, that we actually aren't going just to have rip and ship or become a branch plant for just parts assembly from the United States?
No, listen, I want Canada to be a leading supplier of sustainable and responsible battery materials, because I know that this is going to anchor our auto sector in Canada. As you know, the OEMs are focusing on proximity, on sustainability, and I think that's one of the big competitive advantage of Canada. What I can assure you, I'm in touch with the CEOs. We're trying to build a full ecosystem from mines to recycling, which is a fairly complex ecosystem to put together, because it implies that you have the mining company, you have what we call the CAM manufacturers, so cathode active materials, we have the battery assembly plant, and we have the OEM. But I can tell you, I speak to CEO of these companies, if it's not daily, weekly, to make sure that we land that. I appreciate it's very competitive. That's why I hope that we'll be able to announce that and work together, because I know...
It's very, sorry to cut you off. I only have a quick... So why not go back to CAPC, which isn't functioning like it used to before? There's some very good people there. There's some good ideas. This government even paid Rantangue to actually develop a plan and bring a Canadian national auto strategy where we actually benchmark our plant development, our jobs, and our investments, and rate ourselves on that. Why not bring back that to CAPC and tell them to develop you a Canadian national auto strategy?
Well, I'm always happy to see, like I said, we're going to have a national critical mineral strategy. We are in touch with the auto manufacturers, the part manufacturers. We've been working a lot to make sure we can land that, because time is of the essence. Would appreciate with me, Mr. Massey. I work every day to make sure we land that, because decisions that are going to be made now will have impact for generations to come. And that's why I'm so keen to land the battery ecosystem, because that's anchoring our auto sector in Canada. I'm like you, I want more mandates. And I think, if we work together, we're going to land some of them.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre. Conscient du fait que vous devez quitter à 6h30, je pense qu'on aura le temps pour...
Minister, given that you have to leave at 6:30, I think we have time for one last set of questions. Mr. Généreux, 5 minutes, please. I can't hear you, Mr. Généreux. Oh, okay, I can hear you now, Mr. Généreux. I'll try to be very brief, and I would ask you to be as brief as possible as well. I will give you a chance to be even more transparent than you were earlier with my colleague. You became a minister on minister in this portfolio on the 26th of October, if I remember correctly. The transaction was announced on the 12th. When exactly were you informed of that transaction? Mr. Généreux, I'm very pleased to see you today. As you know, I am not at liberty under the Act to disclose the details of the transaction. What I can say, however, is that the transaction under the guidelines implemented in March was not only looked at and reviewed under national security, but in addition, there was an enhanced review to ensure that would not have an impact on Canada's national security. Minister, does the Canadian Minister of Industry have the final word on transactions made in the department? Well, when we're considering national security reviews, it's something. I'm sorry, I'm asking whether you are the one to make the interpreter regrets, but multiple people are talking at the same time. The chair has asked Mr. Généreux to allow the minister to conclude. Mr. Généreux, I work closely with officials from the department, people from national security, to ensure that these transactions are properly reviewed. And when it comes to critical minerals, all of that is subject to the new regime brought in March, so that there is enhanced review to ensure that proposed transaction respects the country's national security. Question: when transactions take place with companies that are held by governments, in some cases like China, what exactly is the role of the minister in cases like that? Under the Act, the Minister of Innovation is responsible for the enforcement of the Investment Canada Act. When it comes to state-owned enterprises, you can see that automatically under Section 7 of the new guidelines from March, you can see that all these transactions, regardless of the amounts in question, will be subject to the enhanced review according to these new rules. Why is it that the 45 potential additional days were not used to check the transaction? Because, Minister, essentially what you are saying is that the lithium in Argentina was not the lithium we needed here, but there's a Chinese company that decided to spend $1 billion for lithium technologies. They were interested, but apparently it doesn't interest us. I can understand that lithium can be different in different cases, but how is it? How is it that we're allowing a state-owned enterprise to come compete with us? Because they are going to bring it to China, even if it's in Argentina. They're going to bring it to China, and then they're going to sell us batteries back. And in fact, they are already selling us batteries. So ultimately, they are clearly doing pretty well out of the matter. Why isn't it the same for us? Especially given our national security and our relationship with the U.S., as my colleague was saying earlier. Answer: well, Mr. Généreux, I'm very pleased to repeat this in French. The transaction, the neolithium transaction, was closely reviewed to ensure that it would not have an impact on national security. And additionally, it was subject to the additional procedure brought in March. And under the Investment Canada Act, and this is what I need to make very clear for those who are listening, the minister's investigative powers begin the moment that we become aware of a transaction. And that can be well before a notification is made to the department. The minister under the Act has the power to investigate, to act for documents to be produced, to speak to the company as soon as it becomes aware of this matter through public channels. I know that you're asking about the timeline, but what I'm saying is that the Act enables us to investigate even before the official notification. So there are not two different review processes. There's just one process with multiple steps where we start on day one. So when we come to a conclusion at a certain point that there is no danger to Canada's national security, that is when we conclude the investigation based on the recommendations from Canada's national security agencies. I'm sorry to interrupt, but Mr. Généreux, Minister, that's all the time you have. And it's 6:30. I know you have to leave, Minister. Well, Minister, the minister says he could remain for a few more minutes. And the chair says that there's only one question left, one turn left to finish the second round. Very well. In that case, we'll go to Mr. Gahir for 5 minutes.
Hi, Minister. Thank you for making time.
Good evening. It's good to see you.
Nice to see you as well. So my question is, what's the government's track record when it comes to reviewing ICA cases? And are there examples that you can give where a foreign takeover in the mining sector was rejected on national security grounds?
Well, I'm happy you asked the questions because one thing I can say is that we did 4 times more review than the previous government. and we blocked twice as much transaction as the previous government. So I think we should take no lessons from the Conservatives when it comes to national security. And that's going to be abundantly clear with the annual report we're going to be submitting. Listen, I'm happy you asked the question because not only I issued the new security guidelines when it comes to foreign investment in March, I'm the minister who issued the new framework on security when it comes to research in our university and colleges. We blocked the transaction, you may recall, TMAC in Nunavut, which was the subject of a foreign takeover. We took the proper time, like in the case of Neolithium, to review the transaction, and we decided on the basis of national security to block it. And more recently, you may have seen that I have ordered to the Governor and Council China Mobile to divest all its assets in Canada. So Canadians who are watching us tonight should understand that our track record speaks for itself. National security is paramount in our decision. This was the case in Neolithium. And again, to repeat, to be absolutely clear, Neolithium was reviewed on a national security basis and was even subject to the enhanced scrutiny that is called for under the guidelines that I've issued to make sure that this would not be injurious to Canada's national security.
Great, thank you. So I feel like there's a balancing need between economic interests and national security considerations. What are the assessments that happen behind the scenes, sort of, to balance economic interest and national security interests? What's the thought process behind it?
Well, on one end, we want foreign investment in Canada. It's good, we've seen a number of companies that have been able to grow because we had foreign investments in the country. On the other end, we want to make sure that we tell the world and the investors that we will protect our national security. And that's what you've seen with the new guidelines that I published in March. It's very specific. It tells the world exactly that if you're a foreign company trying to invest in any of these sectors, not only we will do the national security review, which is a multi-step process, as I've explained many times, but the transaction will be subject to enhanced scrutiny. That includes state-owned enterprises. That includes investment when it comes to critical minerals. But it's something that I think is very important because, yes, we're open for business, but everyone in the world should know when it comes to critical mineral, personal data, sensitive technologies, we will always protect national security. We never hesitated. I have full trust in our national security and intelligence agency. They're doing great work. They're the ones who advise us with respect to Neolithium and all the other transaction. But it's a quasi-judicial process, so we need to apply, legal standards when we do that. That's what we did, and that's what we'll continue to do.
Great, thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Gahir. Je comprends que vous n'avez pas d'autres.
Thank you very much. I understand that you don't have any further questions. So, Minister, that's the second round. Thank you very much for being here. We will now move into our second hour with the various departmental officials. Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, colleagues.
See you next week in Ottawa. Thanks for having me to the committee, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So we're now going to Madame Gray for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to the officials for being here today. And I'll leave it up to you to decide who would be best to answer my questions today. So when determining whether an enhanced security review of these types of transactions would take place where a corporation is acquired by a state-owned enterprise, are you or your departments instructed by the government to provide analysis of potential intellectual property being transferred?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think, so I'm Simon Kennedy, the Deputy at the Department of Innovation, Science and Economic Development, and we administer the process, so I can field some of the questions. Yes, absolutely. Intellectual property considerations are certainly something that does get looked at pretty carefully, depending on the transaction and the nature of the transaction, because obviously, transfer of IP can be very sensitive. There can be security implications. So that is something that is kind of part and parcel of the work that we do and that we do with our colleagues in the security community.
Great, thank you. And in these types of transactions, are you or your departments instructed by the federal government to analyze major shareholders of a corporation being acquired and its security implications? And what would the analysis of those major shareholders look like with potential connections to foreign state-owned enterprises?
Mr. Chair, I think what I would say would be that when we do these reviews, we are interested in any and all aspects that could pose a potential threat to Canada's national security. If you look at the threshold in the legislation to go to the kind of governor and council mandated step, it is that something could pose a risk to national security. It's not would, it's could. So we're actually interested in anything that could pose a potential risk, and that could include individuals associated with the organization, issues around corporate governance. I mean, it's not like there's a short list and anything that's not on the list doesn't get looked at. We're actually interested in any and all possible threats, and if something is detected that looks like it's problematic, we would zoom in on that.
Great, thank you very much. In the acquisition of companies by state-owned enterprises, have your departments been instructed by the federal government to provide analysis on potential effects to the critical mineral supply chains of Canada that might be affected as part of this deal?
I think, Mr. Chair, what I would say would be, maybe if I could just very briefly, critical minerals are one of the areas that we look at very carefully for all of the reasons the minister has already enumerated, their importance and so on. And then in addition, we also, as is laid out in the guidelines that accompany the Act, we also take special care when state-owned enterprises are involved. So whether a state-owned enterprise is involved with a critical mineral asset or whether they're involved in something completely different, that's also an area that we look at. And the guidelines lay out, the reasons why that's the case. But for example, there are some state-owned enterprises that can act in ways that are not economic. And if they were operating a business in Canada, in ways that were not really market-driven, that might be distortionary. It might not be efficient. It might cause all kinds of problems. So that would be one example, but we certainly look at both the SOE dimension of investments and the critical mineral dimension.
Great, thank you. And would you say that that some of the enhanced measures have made a difference? Like how would that analysis be different?
Well, I would certainly say that there's a variety of ways, Mr. Chair, that has made a difference. I can just enumerate a couple quickly. I know we don't take too much time, but certainly there is a professional bar. There are law firms and advisors who advise potential investors looking to buy Canadian companies. And the fact that we have these policies around enhanced review and that we publish them, actually, that means that when investors come, they know that they can expect to get a deeper analysis. So that would be one example. Another would be, that it gives us some guidance on areas where we want to drill down and maybe put additional attention in our review. And the last would be, I think, as the minister noted, and it will be in our annual report coming out soon, that just the sheer tempo in terms of the number of these national security reviews that have been done, the number of blocks has certainly risen quite dramatically in the last couple of years relative to the historical baseline. So there's just more activity going on in terms of deeper and more frequent reviews in this space than there might have been in the past.
Great, thank you for that. Do you have
Madam Gray,
metrics or rubric that you're using?
Madam Gray, I'm sorry, you have 5 seconds left, so we'll have to move on to our next questioner, Mr. Fillmore, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you very much to the officials who are here. Thank you for your hard work and your service. I know that every member of this committee is very grateful to you for your work. I think I'll start by directing this question to Mr. Kennedy, but really I would welcome, if any of the other panelists hear something that they'd like to respond to, I encourage you to follow on. I appreciate it very much. Now, we heard in testimony at yesterday's committee meeting that acquiring raw materials from overseas wasn't really the issue, but rather that the issue is that China dominates the market for processing the minerals, the materials, and for the production of batteries. So I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about how is Canada developing its own processing and manufacturing capacity? And let's bring it back to the auto industry for a moment. Why is that important to our domestic auto industry?
Well, Mr. Chair, I can speak maybe briefly and then maybe turn to Mr. Labonte from NRCan, who's, his ministry is doing a lot of work in this space. I can certainly say, as the Deputy Minister at ISED, that we have extensive work underway, including with our colleagues at Natural Resources Canada, on the mines to mobility strategy. There is frankly, a full court press to try to support the Canadian industry in shifting towards battery electric vehicle production. And part and parcel of that is to work to bring the battery supply chain and all of the various, components to Canada. So we're in active discussions with mining companies, cathode active material manufacturers, battery assembly players, parties that are interested in building, gigafactories in Canada to support the assembly operations that are here. There's a very extensive kind of package of work going on right now to kind of build out the Canadian mining and processing and battery production supply chain. I can turn to Mr. Labonte. He may wish to add some expert advice from NRCan.
Thank you very much. Can I be here? You're hearing me okay?
Yes.
Terrific. So it's a good question around the processing. So when we look at the minerals that come out of the ground and from source, obviously they're not in a form that can be used for things like battery manufacturing or production of silicon panels or anything of that nature. So we do have a fairly sophisticated processing capacity in Canada. It's 27 different mineral processing facilities across the country. One of the issues is, of course, supply and demand. So there are no large-scale battery, for example, cell manufacturing companies in Canada yet. So the demand for the processed materials that go into them is following where that demand exists, and that demand today is in China and growing everywhere. But as Deputy Kennedy said, Canada's growing its importance of bringing in partners and bringing in companies such that those two things will fit together. The issue, too, is that processing minerals is very unique in many different ways, and there are, of course, research and development. So in the last budget of 2021, there was about $50 million allocated to NRCan to upscale and do more research and to support research on the processing side to get ahead of and can kind of continue to develop the ability for Canada to be in a position to continue to develop its processing capabilities.
Okay, thank you. Let's stick with batteries for the battery production themselves for a moment here. It strikes me that for a country as large as Canada, longer range, more energy dense, more lightweight batteries are going to be needed to help us transition away from fossil fuels. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how Canada's critical mineral supply is going to help us achieve that, and how the government is going to help Canada's mineral supply achieve that. And if I could just say, as a planner, I would love to hear if there are any connections you'd care to draw between those energy-dense batteries and electrified public transit or electrified active transportation.
Mr. Chair, I would say that certainly in our discussions with both the automotive OEMs and then the battery supply chain players, it's quite clear that the kind of quality, energy density, the kind of the ability of the batteries to actually supply that level of power is a critical consideration. But perhaps Mr. Labonte could speak with a bit more authority on some of the details around lithium and the different kinds of lithium. The minerals that go into the battery production. But that's our experience talking to the companies, is that they're looking to build the higher end, I think, of the supply chain here for the auto industry.
Monsieur Labonte, malheureusement, c'est tout le temps qu'on a.
Unfortunately, that's all the time we have. Perhaps you'll have a chance to answer later. And now, Mr. Lemille for 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think Mr. Kennedy will have to answer my question, but if anyone else wants to respond, that would be fine as well. The minister said that he reviewed the guidelines in March 2021 and that he added an additional process. With this additional process and the new guidelines, could you assure us that the Chinese company in this transaction was not able to appropriate expertise or IP? I can say that in that case, as well as in every case, Mr. Chair, we carry out reviews when the business in question is a business in a sector like that. We carry out a more in-depth and a more attentive review. And if we find that there are no problems or risks, we do not proceed with a broader review, but we do if we do find there's a further risk. In this case, the experts from the department did not reach the conclusion that there was such a risk. That is why, at the end of the day, the transaction was allowed.
Monsieur le maire,
micro ne marche pas. Pardon. Quand vous dites une analyse plus en profondeur,
when you say an enhanced analysis, if the purchasing company is from China or if it's a state-owned enterprise, does that trigger a more enhanced analysis or not? When it comes to SOEs, whether it be China, Russia, the Middle East, anywhere, that is an important factor when it comes to our review. There are SOEs that have more business concerns, and then there are countries where it's a bit the opposite. Ultimately, these businesses are being used as tools to advance their objectives. We are aware of that, and that is all part of our review. When it's an SOE, that triggers the need for a more in-depth review. Has the minister informed himself as to purchase options and the exercise of these purchase options? Has there been more information requested about that? Answer: certainly. As I noted earlier with your colleague, we are very interested in all specifics that could indicate that there is a national security problem. I cannot give any exact details on your question here, but we are closely examining anything that could indicate a problem, and that includes shareholders' positions. Thank you, Mr. Lemire. Now, Mr. Mass, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for our guests to be here tonight. With regards to different departments that are consulted, is there a mandate to go through every single department and to check in on that? So say, for example, I'm also on the International Trade Committee, and we'll be looking at, Canada's looking at other trade options in Asia, partly to create less dependency on China. So is there kind of those types of discussions that take place in analysis with regards to what could be at stake?
Mr. Chair, I would say that there's a fairly systematic and rigorous process to engage the town, as folks in Ottawa would know. But obviously, depending on the transaction, there will be some ministries that'll be potentially a lot more implicated. But there's a table of assistant deputy ministers that would meets regularly to discuss reviews. We obviously engage and rely very heavily on our security and intelligence community as well. So the answer, I think, to Mr. Messier's question would be in general, yes, that we don't just say, okay, we're only going to talk to this department for this transaction. There is a kind of broader table where these issues get ventilated.
Would they be impacted by current events? I guess I'm just looking, is it just process? And I appreciate your answer in that the previous question, but would there be current events that would be part of that assessment? I suppose it would, but I just don't want to assume that.
Mr. Chair, I would say absolutely current events are something that is very much, part and parcel of our work. I can give you a very concrete example of this. Maybe it's, kind of so obvious as to, but, when the pandemic hit, it became immediately apparent that there was growing interest and not always positive interest in, medical supplies, vaccines and those sorts of things. And that was one of the reasons the government promulgated new guidance. And actually, there were changes to the law, kind of temporary, as part of the temporary COVID measures, to actually give us additional time to review transactions because we actually were concerned. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. I don't mean to. I just have 2 minutes. I have a real quick question. Important one I want to get to you is that EV production hasn't started in Canada. Other countries are way ahead of us. How do we get ahead? Like, what do we do to stop this poor trend?
I could say, Mr. Chair, that I, for what it's worth, as the senior civil servant at the Department of Innovation, Science, and Economic Development, I must say I'm feeling quite bullish about Canada's prospects. I mean, there's intense work going on now with the OEMs, with the parts sector, with all the various players in the battery supply chain, as I described earlier. And I do think obviously the proof will be in the results, but I think we have real cause for optimism. There's advanced discussions going on in a whole variety of areas, and I'm very hopeful that we'll see some results.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. We'll move now to Mr. Fast for 5 minutes.
Well, hello, Mr. Kennedy. Nice to see you again. And
nice to see you, sir.
Yes. Listen, I still want to get into the process of making a decision on national security, because the minister has asked us to take his word that, in fact, an enhanced security review was conducted, but in fact, he didn't provide any details as to that. So, Deputy, I'm not asking you to get into any of the details of this particular transaction, but more broadly speaking, in a situation where there's a state-owned enterprise involved that's buying out a Canadian company and attracts the enhanced review, would you normally consult with the Minister of Public Safety?
There is, I would say, Mr. Chair, it is normal for us to consult with our security and intelligence partners on, in any national security review, whether that's the kind of the scrutiny we're providing prior to this kind of formal trigger of this cabinet process or after. Those are our key partners for us, and so, CSIS, CSE, the various players in the security and intelligence community. Those are normal partners we work with quite regularly.
What about the National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister?
Certainly, when we have reviews that would be going through the Governor and Council process, that would be, as an example, that would be standard, because those are reviews that are going through a cabinet process, and it will be a kind of part and parcel of that the National Security Advisor will be engaged because the Prime Minister is chair of cabinet.
Would you consult with our allies, specifically the United States?
Certainly, consultation and discussion with allies is not at all unusual. So I think the answer, just in general, will be yes. That could certainly be part and parcel of discussions that we have.
So, did all those consultations take place in this particular transaction?
Mr. Chair, it's very difficult for me to enumerate specific details of exactly who we talked to and when. I certainly appreciate the member's question. The ICA is, as members will know, is got extraordinarily strict provisions about what I can and can't disclose about specific transactions. What I can say is that this underwent a very thorough review involving our allies involving our colleagues in the security agencies, certainly involving experts in the domain, and the result is the one that we're all obviously here talking about today.
Okay. Did I hear you say that, in fact, this review did involve our allies?
Mr. Chair, I'm sort of saying that what I'd said before, which is that we work with our colleagues in Ottawa, but I'm not really in a position to, kind of publicly discuss, basically discussions with foreign governments and whether they did or did not happen.
I mentioned that because...
But I can say, Mr. Fast, that is not an unusual part of discussions we would have when we're looking at very sensitive transactions.
Well, I hope that's the case, because there's a tweet that's already come out from an American congressman asking whether, in fact, the Biden administration was consulted on this transaction. So let me just talk very quickly about batteries. We talked about the capacity to build EVs and batteries in Canada. If we had a battery plant, a lithium battery plant, ready to go in Canada today, would we have the lithium in Canada to be able to supply that factory?
We don't currently, Mr. Chair, have production of lithium in Canada. We certainly have significant deposits. And as I noted earlier, certainly in the discussions we are having with proponents in the battery supply chain, there's active discussions going on at all parts of the chain, including mining and processing. So and my colleagues at Enercan could maybe offer more detail if necessary.
So why would we allow a Canadian company to be disposed of to a Chinese state-owned company that is actually producing lithium, that is of battery grade? I'm going to challenge the minister on that. There's lots of evidence at this table and elsewhere that in fact this mine is producing or will produce battery-grade lithium, and yet here we've had the government approve the sale of a Canadian company that has access to battery-grade lithium to a Chinese state-owned enterprise. Can you explain that?
Mr. Chair, what I would maybe reiterate is that the advice and the decisions that are made through this process are look at the facts, on the ground of individual specific cases. So the question that would be asked here would be, is this particular deposit in this particular part of the world, given all of the circumstances, is this relevant and of value, and would it be something that would ever be exploited by the North American supply chain? And the conclusion, the answer to that question was no. This was not of strategic value to the North American supply chain. And there may be, many experts can comment on this, but as has already been noted, there are different kinds of lithium deposits. They require different sorts of processing. There are transport costs. There's the distance to the market. There's the issue of I see Mike got the red card.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Kennedy. We're above time. So I'll move now to Madame Lapointe for 5 minutes.
Merci. My question is for Mr. Labonte. As you know, Canada released a list of critical minerals last March, and the critical minerals list was created in collaboration with exploration, mining, and manufacturing industries, and extensive consultation with the provinces and territories over a period of several months. The list certainly provides greater certainty and predictability to industry, trading partners, and investors on what Canada has to offer. For example, Canada is the only Western nation that has an abundance of cobalt, graphite, lithium, and nickel, which is essential to creating the batteries and electric vehicles of the future. And of course, minerals that can be produced in Canada are essential to domestic industry and security, and have the potential to support secure and resilient supply chains to meet global demands. So my question to you is, can you tell us more about the essential mining strategy that the government is currently developing?
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair, for the question, and appreciate the chance to talk about it. So you are correct that we did, the Government of Canada did publish this strategic critical minerals list of 31 different critical minerals that are most important, and that list was compiled through a fairly extensive consultation, as you pointed out, and analysis. And the things that were being looked at for Canada with that particular list was really about, the importance of our economic security, about the need for Canada to have the critical minerals for the transition of our economy to the economy of the future and low carbon economy, and also as things that would be important to potential partners in sustainability activities. And in looking at the list, we established what were the minerals as well that Canada had an endowment, where Canada actually has the materials, the minerals exist in our landscape, and that those minerals have the potential to be developed or are already being developed, depending on the nature of that particular material. So in doing so, it was a way of convening an understanding amongst the mineral community, or amongst the investment community, amongst downstream or manufacturing community, to look at where sources of materials and minerals would come from, and also to sort of rally an understanding of where the directions would be going vis-a-vis the importance of these minerals for the economy, as well as working in terms of growing the nature of how minerals are developed. Which is an important part, because of course the minerals themselves are one thing, but of course how they're developed, the partnerships that are involved, the regulatory standards, and sort of protecting the environment, and doing so in a way that is of the highest standard possible and the higher standard necessary, is part of the way that Canada sees itself, and part of the way that Canada presents itself globally. Canadian mining companies operate in 100 countries around the world, have over $200 billion worth of assets that are part of and parcel of their ecosystem. And similarly, there are over $300 billion worth of assets in Canada of our mineral resources, and those resources are, again, some 1,400 different companies operate, developing and prospecting and working through those resources.
Thank you. And with regard to specifically lithium, what is the current state of our domestic industry in your assessment?
So it's a good question. So Canada's fortunate in that there are 20 different lithium projects active in Canada, and they're spread from Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, and Quebec. Canada actually has two different types of lithium resources. So we have lithium brine resources, which are similar to the resources that are found in brine water or liquid sources, and then are produced by a process of ventilating and drying those and evaporating those resources, and the lithium is what's left over. And that lithium is most commonly the lithium that finds its way into the lithium carbonate processing services and the way that it's produced. The second type of lithium is lithium that comes from lithium hard rock. So a hard rock ore body that contains lithium and is essentially mined, and then the ore body is processed for it to separate the lithium, which is more predominantly put into lithium hydroxide. It's possible to go in either way. So brine can produce hydroxide, and a carbonate can produce, the hard rock may be able to produce lithium carbonate. However, it's more efficient, and certainly the energy cost, the cost of transporting the ore body, the cost of processing that body make for it to be more efficient. So we have 20 different projects active in Canada. The most active ones that are more near term to market are in Quebec, where the mining community has already developed lithium resources. And more active projects are actually underway in Alberta on the lithium brine side, and in Saskatchewan.
Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Labonté. Madame Lapointe, je passerai maintenant la parole à Monsieur Crum pour 5 minutes.
Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for joining us this evening. I would like to talk a little bit about the way that CSIS conducts its intelligence assessments. I would like to give a bit of background regarding the net assessment practice, and I'm referring to a practice that originated in the United States for strategic analysis of threats. This practice originated some 40 years ago and is still practiced today in the United States. It involves considering a threat from multiple perspectives, including ways in which it could enhance the strategic advantage of a competitor or adversary. So I was wondering if the witnesses from CSIS could expand a bit about whether CSIS conducts intelligence assessments in this way.
So thank you very much for the question, Mr. Chair. I'm pleased to answer it. When the service is an investigative body, of course, we go out looking for any intelligence that can support an assessment or basically answer the question as to whether or not there is a national security threat that we could potentially be facing. So we tend to go out, we go to numerous sources, and we gather as much information as we possibly can so we can get the most comprehensive picture in order to answer the question. And then we do a full assessment looking at all different aspects, and from that assessment we provide our advice into government.
All right, my next question is for Mr. Kennedy. So did you provide a final recommendation to the minister on this transaction?
Mr. Chair, what I would say is that when it comes to, we do many reviews per year. When it comes to ones that, are found to be sensitive or there's some issue, that certainly there's, the minister is kept abreast of those and engaged. That's a matter of course. And so maybe that's what I would offer at this point.
And Mr. Kennedy, in your opinion, was this particular transaction particularly sensitive?
Certainly, Mr. Chair, because of the fact that it was critical minerals, because of the involvement of a state-owned enterprise, this would certainly be one that would kind of be on the list or rise to the level of be something that would be not ordinary. If just to elaborate a little bit, if you look at the number of transactions that we reviewed last year, there would have been, into the hundreds, and it was 800 something. And the year before that, there was 1,000. There's a relatively smaller number that would be ones that would be sufficiently interesting that we would be talking to them about the government or would indeed go to the cabinet.
So this particular transaction was interesting enough to be brought to the attention of the minister. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, this is something that we would have kept the minister apprised of.
And when did you first inform the minister about the details of this transaction?
Mr. Chair, what I would say would be to maybe reiterate and maybe even add a little bit of detail to what the minister said in his opening statement, just to reiterate that the investigative powers of the minister to conduct reviews, are kind of, they exist. They don't require the triggering of a special measure. And so in this case, I can certainly confirm, for example, that that our review was longer than the 45 days prescribed by the statute, because we have the ability, when we become informed of something, whether it's through press reports or otherwise, to actually kind of start looking at it. So, I'm not really in a position here to get into, kind of specifics of kind of when I talk to the minister and when not. I think most members can appreciate that, but I can certainly say that we were reviewing this for some time. It was certainly over a period of months. It was certainly not kind of just confined to the 45-day period. And certainly as a matter of course, because we do this for sensitive transactions, certainly the minister and the government were informed. And we were working with our allies and other ministries as well as we do any review.
Okay, so let me put it this way. See that it was on October 8th that this transaction was first reported in the mainstream media. Can you at least say whether the minister would have become aware of this transaction before the mainstream media?
Mr. Chair, I'm not quite sure. I'm not quite sure what the question is.
Would the minister have been made aware of this transaction before it was reported in the mainstream media on October 8th?
Mr. Chair, I don't really think I'm in a position to be getting into details of when I spoke to my minister or not. As a deputy minister, I think most members understand that, my advice to the minister is confidential. I can speak in general terms. We inform the minister, and we discuss with the minister transactions. This is a multi-departmental process that it is, very thorough. That process was followed in this case. It was longer than the 45-day period because we certainly became aware of it in the fall before an official notification, and that the threshold for a formal decision of the government the decision is made by the cabinet, and that is only undertaken if it is found that there is a possible risk to national security, which, as is obvious in this case, that was not found.
Thank you, Mr. Cram. Mr. Kennedy, I'll turn now to Mr. Gahir for 5 minutes.
Hi, thank you, Chair. So my question is for the Deputy Minister, but others can chime in. So yesterday, one of the witnesses talked about the importance about cooperation with our allies in North America and Europe to secure critical minerals and to counter Chinese interests. Can you speak a little bit about the measures that are taken by this country and maybe the U.S. Along the lines of that strategy?
Certainly, Mr. Chair. I mean, I can say that we have an active dialogue with our allies on the issue of critical minerals. In particular, with the United States would be a very good example of that. And we have an active program of work to support the development of supply chains to develop Canada's critical mineral base as a contribution to the work we're doing with our allies. So there is a great deal of activity in this space. On the issue of critical minerals specifically, if you would wish to have more details, Mr. Labonte could probably talk a little bit about that as well, because as minister, are deeply involved in the work.
Sure. Thank you very much for the question. So we have a very active dialogue that's been ongoing for over 2.5, 3 years with the United States as a critical mineral joint action plan. We have collaborative work under 5 working groups with the U.S., and it's shared amongst federal departments. So Mr. Kennedy's department leads, co-chairs some of those, as well as our Defense Department and others. So we have areas of collaboration around defense. We have research into business related to fora and innovate. And so we're focused on sharing information, sharing data, having researchers work together, having trade and promotion activities in which U.S. companies are thinking about Canada and Canada's thinking about the U.S. We have a similar dialogue with the EU, an EU raw materials partnership with the European Union, which was a year ago, in which we're having a research and development cooperation and multilateral dialogue as well. In all of these, we're aligning where we have common interest around sustainable development, around trying to crack some of the research codes on how to process better, how to have better environmental performance, for example. And so that kind of collaborative work has been a priority on critical minerals for a number of years now. And at this point, we continue that collaboration quite extensively.
Great, thank you. We've talked about our relationship with the U.S., but the U.S. doesn't have a critical mineral strategy. And how far along is Canada as compared to the U.S. when it comes to a strategy like that?
So the U.S. actually has very similar tendencies as Canada in this space. So they have a list that's similar to ours, and the list actually overlaps with Canada's quite extensively. The responsibility for critical minerals in the U.S. is scattered amongst a number of different departments. There's a much stronger defense and security focus with respect to their stance, and it's parcel of the larger global context. So we work with the Department of Commerce, the Department of Interior, the Department of Energy, and the State Department. And in that space, the U.S. has, like Canada, a sort of strategy in terms of pushing on the research side and building up processing capabilities, on gathering better exploration and geoscientific information, which is really about understanding the resources better, and then investing in the supply chain all the way through, such that the manufacturing sector and the advanced development sector, whether it's automobiles or renewable energy or energy storage, have the feedstock and the critical minerals that are going to supply those value chains to grow and prosper.
Great, thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Gaillard. On passerait maintenant à...
Thank you very much. And now, Mr. Lemille for 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much. A question for Mr. Kennedy. Given that natural resources are an area of provincial jurisdiction, and they have to do with these discussions with foreign partners, are there calls being made?
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Chair, I'm not necessarily aware of the details of the discussions between my colleagues and counterparts in other ministries or in the United States. I'm not aware personally of all those meetings. Perhaps Mr. Labonte could respond to that question, because I know there is an in-depth discussion with our partners about the matter of minerals. But I don't have an immediate answer. But what about within Canada? Oh, I'm sorry. Regarding the provinces, I thought you were asking about the Americans. Jeff, do you want to answer that question, Jeff? Thank you very much for the question. We do have a working table with our provincial counterparts and the federal government. It's the Ministers' Committee for Mines and Energy. It meets once a year with all the ministers, and there are also deputy minister and ADM meetings that meet more frequently. In my area of critical minerals, we speak once a month with my Quebec and other provincial counterparts. We have close partnerships in our activities when it comes to information exchange, science, and discussions with industry for investments and so on and so forth. Thank you very much. Mr. Kennedy, in the Pan-American Joint Plan with Canada and U.S., will marketing be done in Quebec by Quebec companies? Can you inform us about that? I believe that once again, that might be a question for Mr. Labonte. Do you have any details on that? We have been talking with Quebec companies, indeed. But generally, the discussions between businesses and with businesses is a dynamic discussion, inaudible for the interpreter. So it all depends what kind of discussion, whether it's natural resources, minerals, or processes with manufacturing companies. I'm sorry, I was having trouble finding the French word. I'm sorry, Mr. Lemille, your time is up. Thank you, Mr. Labonte.
Just past year and a half, we saw how vulnerable the auto industry is with regards to microchips. Sadly, that was actually produced in Mississauga for years, and we watched Taiwan actually bring in a national strategy to usurp that business. Even the United States is building it back. We're not doing anything over here of any significance whatsoever. I don't share the same optimism with batteries. And Mr. Kennedy, we have a big fat zero on the scoreboard, right? We have none. What portion does the United States have with regards to electric batteries? About an hour drive from here is Lansing, Michigan, where I'm at in Windsor, Ontario. They just got another plant, another one. And New York State even got parts components for electric vehicles announced, over $150 million approximately going to there as an investment. What does the U.S. have? At least we're tied with their supply chain in Mexico. You to get an idea, because at least we're still tied with those two other countries that have been expanding quite significantly their auto production and also their battery production, where we haven't, but at least we have partners that are.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Oh. Yes, Mr. Fast.
I believe Mr. Massey's testimony was interrupted.
Je n'entends pas les commentaires de la salle.
I can't hear what's being said in the room.
Yeah, I believe Mr. Massey's testimony was interrupted. Probably it was again a broadband issue, and perhaps he could just finish the last part of his testimony again, so that all of us can hear it. Even the interpreters couldn't hear it.
Sure. Can just what I'm looking for, and thank you, Mr. Chair, and to Mr. Fast, is we're tied with the United States and Mexico in process and production. What is their footprint of electric battery production and parts production versus out of China, for example? Do you have that? If you don't have it, could you get that back to our committee? I'd be interested in kind of where we're at.
Mr. Chair, I don't have the facts right in front of me, but very happy to follow up with a piece of paper to the committee.
That would be excellent. And perhaps even just, if you're going to do that, expand it to other operators like in Europe as well, too, because you'll probably have all that data together if that's there. And I'll cede the floor, Mr. Chair, because you've been very generous with me of going over. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Massey. Mr. Généreux for 5 minutes.
Monsieur le Président, j'aimerais...
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question for Ms. Henderson. Someone we heard from yesterday, Canada's former ambassador to China, Guy Saint-Jacques, said that China is increasingly using trading relationships as a type of quote-unquote political weapon. The most recent example being the rest of the two Michaels, which was a kind of exchange against Meng Wanzhou. So, is there a situation where Canadians abroad might actually be threatened if Canada doesn't say yes to everything that China is asking from Canadians? Thank you very much for the question. I will answer in English.
As we have stated before in public reports and speech last year, the government of China is pursuing a strategy for geopolitical advantage on all fronts: economic, technological, of state power to carry out activities that are a direct threat to our national sovereignty and our national security. While China is a partner to Canada on some fronts, it is also a sophisticated and powerful player in the field of intelligence. And we, as an agency, are very attuned to watching any foreign interference activity that we see. We collect and we assess and we advise government on a regular basis.
Alors, dans ce sens-là, d'autres témoins...
With that in mind, other witnesses we heard from yesterday, including Wesley Warg, stated that it would be desirable to have more transparency regarding national security inquiries, which you are part of, and that it might be better for the public to be more aware. If Canadians were really familiar with the scope of Chinese ambitions throughout the world, do you think they would find the acquisition of neolithium as being acceptable and in Canada's national interest?
Monsieur le Président, je peux répondre à cette question.
I can answer that question, Mr. Chair. It is our intention to increase transparency.
Rapport annuel.
The sound cut out. The interpreter regrets. There are now operations in the area of national security, and we are increasingly including details in our public reports every year. And in the most recent version that we will be publishing in the coming days, there are more details. Conversely, however, some have noticed that if we give more and more details about the areas where we have concerns, well then, it may actually give our inaudible for the interpreter.
Monsieur le Président, je suis désolé, mais
Mr. Chair, once again, there seems to be a bandwidth issue. I don't know. Various witnesses are having the same problem, but I wasn't able to understand most of our colleagues' answer. There do seem to be bandwidth issues. I think the clerk is working to fix the problem. But you don't seem to be able to hear much. Is that right? Well, it seems to be something about the connection. Sometimes the voice is just cutting out and we're just missing out on little bits of the answer. And it's been happening since the beginning of the meeting. Okay, noted. We will be working with the IT services to try to prevent that from happening. I'm trying to see with the clerk in the room. He's speaking with the various technicians. Meanwhile, perhaps I can continue. Yes, I don't know if Mr. Kennedy can speak a little more slowly in case a few words are lost somewhere. So I would ask Mr. Kennedy to repeat his answer, the last portion of his answer. I was just going to say that, as I was explaining earlier, we want to be more transparent, and we have been trying to be more and more transparent in our annual report. However, we sometimes wonder whether it's a good idea to be that transparent about the specifics of each individual review, because the danger is that it may give a roadmap inaudible.
Monsieur le Président, la réponse de Monsieur Kennedy est coupée exactement au même moment.
Mr. Kennedy's answer cut out at exactly the same point, almost as if someone didn't want us to hear the answer. It's funny, we're hearing everything on Zoom for those of us who are at home.
OK, ben écoute, je remercie Monsieur Kennedy. S'il me reste du temps, Monsieur le Président, s'il vous plaît.
Well, thank you, Mr. Kennedy. If I have any time left, I have another question for Ms. Henderson. Very quickly. You asked a question regarding, or rather, you gave us an answer regarding China, and you said that it was an ally in some areas, but also a fierce competitor, and that it may wish to steal some of our technology. In cases such as that one, in cases such as the one with neolithium, and lithium in general as a major critical resource, do you see cases like that as being a danger or a risk for Canada? You personally?
I'm not going to be able to answer specifically in regards to lithium. But what I would like to say is that we have watched over the past few years a definite increase in what I would term economic espionage across our country. Canada is extremely advanced in much of its research and development, and we have excellent intellectual property. And we have seen a definite interest by foreign states in that kind of information. So what we have attempted to do over the past couple of years, really, and it started with the advent of COVID, which I believe one of my colleagues has mentioned earlier, we did see a huge interest in attempting to get at access to our research and intellectual property. I'm sorry, I'm out of time.
Well,
is it from the Chinese government mostly, or?
Monsieur Généreux, c'est tout le temps que vous aviez, puis j'ai...
Mr. Généreux, that's all the time you have, and I added a little bit because of the technical problems. Thank you, Ms. Henderson. And now, last question, Mr. Erskine-Smith.
Thanks very much. Just so I've got it right, I think Mr. Kennedy had said it's obvious there were no national security concerns with this particular transaction in the way that it went ahead. And so I just want to clarify, Ms. Henderson, you're a national security expert. In relation to this transaction, is it fair to say there were no national security concerns?
So as I'm sure you can appreciate, I'm not able to speak on a specific transaction. What I can say is that we did do our work and we provide our advice into government. And then, as has been mentioned earlier by my colleagues, it is actually a community decision. So we provide our advice, there are other departments that provide their advice. And then there is a decision made as to what is actually in the best interests of our national security.
So let's speak at a general level then. So if you and Mr. Ronchamp, the same would apply to you, if your agencies and your expertise were to provide advice to the government, it would be typical if your advice is there are national security concerns here, this deserves a full review, the government would engage in a full review. Is that fair to say?
What I would say is that our advice is taken in with the advice of all the other departments, and at that point, they determine whether or not there's a need to go forward for a full review.
Okay, I appreciate that. And Mr. Kennedy, the reason I asked those more specific questions actually is because Mr. Kennedy, you said, I think you said, as is obvious, there's no national security concerns at play here. It seems obvious, though, there's strategic considerations at play here. We have a strategic mineral, a critical mineral. We have a company that is that at least the major shareholder is state controlled, and we don't yet have our critical mineral strategy in place. So I guess the question I have, and it refers to a question I put to the minister, but just a case by case look versus a broader strategic look. Would it have made any sense to pause this transaction until the fuller strategy were in place?
Mr. Chair, maybe I could just give a quick answer to this, but maybe widen the lens a little bit. So the threshold for going to a full national security review is something could pose a danger, not would, could. And so I just want to assure the committee that if we get a clear recommendation from the security and intelligence community that they see a problem, that's going to weigh really heavily on whether the could threshold is met. So, we do not disregard, the advice coming certainly from the national security folks. When we do reviews, we do, again, just to come back, the number one kind of thing that animates is this transaction, could it pose a risk to Canada's national security? What is the Canadian interest? And so in this, and just in terms of the honourable member's question, in this circumstance, a key issue is this asset ever likely to be of use or exploited by the North American supply chain, by our allies, by the Canadian industry? And if the answer is yes, that would obviously merit a lot more depth of review and discussion. And if the answer is no, then that would tend to indicate that it's not going to meet the threshold of concern.
And we can read between the lines as to whether it would based on the outcome here. And so to that point, because I'm no expert, so Mr. Labonte, when I look at the domestic critical minerals supply of lithium and the potential to the growing global demand, it's fair to say, you mentioned, I think, the Quebec mine is going to make up a significant percentage, but still a 10%, I think you said, of the North American market. Is it not also fair to say that we're going to need to access global supply, that the North American supply is going to be insufficient for North American demand in relation to lithium in particular?
Well, I think it's a question about what the market looks like and what'll happen over time. I mean, lithium is a critical mineral, but as was pointed out, not all critical minerals are alike. So Canada does have domestic critical mineral resources for lithium. So does the U.S. And in fact, Australia is the largest country in the world, as is Chile, in terms of having lithium resources. So lithium as a resource in terms of its accessibility and where it's found on the global market is fairly broadly available in countries that are more similar, if I could put it that way, to how Canada would expect countries to operate. Some of whom
so pause there, because that's I think the thrust of this, and I'm running out of time. But for allowing this transaction to proceed isn't putting Canada's access to lithium at risk in terms of the resiliency of our supply chains. Is that fair to say?
I can't really answer the question with respect to a specific transaction, just to say that the lithium market certainly has a lot of players in it. Its demand is going to grow, as you pointed out, and Canada does have its own resources in terms of the lithium, and some of which.
I appreciate that. So I'm running out of time. The only thing I would say, though, and this is the lack of the inability to answer fairly straightforward, specific questions. And I know we're saying, well, we can't answer it around this particular transaction, but I think that lends itself to suspicion around transactions, and it should be possible for a national security expert to say there were no national concerns in relation to this particular transaction to Canadians. And we got to change that process, I think, fairly to provide the transparency and to provide the comfort and confidence. Anyway, thanks very much.
Merci, Monsieur Erskine-Smith.
Thank you very much, Mr. Erskine-Smith. That's the end of questions from MPs. I'd like to thank our witnesses, the officials who made themselves available at short notice. Thank you for everything you do for the country. Mr. Lemire, Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I have a request to the department. Could they please table with the committee the data on the purchase of mining companies, the specific table? I will send the specific question to the chair, and if you could send a response, that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you very much. Thank you, and I'm very sorry to the colleagues in person for the technical problems. We will try to fix them. Thank you, and have a good evening. Meeting adjourned. Thank you to interpretation.